volunteer school बैठाइए
first
इसमें, हाँ.
contact meetings.
So Dean sir, if I have your permission, should we start now?
Yes, perfect.
Friends and colleagues, a very good morning to all of you and a very happy new year. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today at the inauguration of a very important and much sought after Gyan course organized by the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. This prestigious These courses are supported by the Ministry of Education, Government of India, and it aims at offering students and faculty members here in India opportunities for academic interaction with renowned scholars from all over the world. 2025, this new year, what a wonderful way to start the new year for the School of International Studies. 3 Gyan courses lined up in quick succession in the 70th year of the school's glorious history. And this course, our course, leads the way. So, this course on Eurasian geopolitics and the new great game in Central Asia has generated a lot of interest among students, and going by the number of registrations for the course and the number of requests for late registrations, even after the registrations had closed, it appears that this course is going to be a great learning experience for all of us. An interesting exchange of perspectives on Eurasian geopolitics and the new great game that is unfolding in the Eurasian landscape, which is a region of great importance for India. 13th January. This is the date today, a very significant date here in India. It marks the start of the colorful harvest festival celebrated across the length and breadth of the country with much fervor. From north to south, from east to west, India is a large country indeed. These festivities are about celebrating togetherness, of expressing gratitude, spreading joy, and also spiritual fulfillment for many. Many of you would be knowing that there is a huge congregation in the holy city of Prayagraj, where millions of devotees from across the globe have assembled to take a holy dip in the holy river, in the sacred river Ganga, or the holy Ganges, as it is called, Mother Ganga. What an auspicious day to start our 10-day course. The excitement in the room says it all. The personal interest and support of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shanti Shri Pandit, has been remarkable. She has been the guiding light of this initiative here in GNU, and she has also paved the way for similar initiatives in several other universities in the country. What we are seeing today is the outcome of months of hard work put together by a team of dedicated Gyan warriors. The JNU Gyan Coordination Committee, headed by Professor Satyabrat Patnaik, who is with us here. His determination to make this happen has made it happen. And our man Friday is Mr. Saurav Singhal, who has been doing all the heavy lifting for all these months. Thank you very much, Sauravji, and thank you very much, Professor Patnaik. Friends, on behalf of JNU and on behalf of the School of International Studies and on behalf of all of us here, I'm honored to welcome Professor Pierre Chaval, Director, L'Exfem Law and Political Science Center, Le Havre, Normandy University, France. An absolute pleasure to have you here, sir. You have traveled all the way from another continent after postponing several pressing engagements at home. Thank you, sir. From your first visit to India and first visit to JNU, in last February, this is your third visit to JNU now. It's been such an amazing journey, to say the least. Thank you so much for your friendship and your willingness to share your expertise with our students and researchers. In fact, you have already been doing so since last February. And a warm welcome to Mrs. Chaval Professor Unsuk, Professor in Korean Studies. Thank you, ma'am, for gracing this occasion. And together, both Professor and Mrs. Shawal, they symbolize the best of what the East and the West is. Thank you, dear participants and colleagues, for your amazing interest in this course. As the course coordinator, I'm happy to announce that we have more than 90 participants registering for this course. Most of them are here, others will be joining us in the online mode. Thank you, Professor Mattu, the Dean of the School of International Studies, for fully supporting all our academic endeavors. Your inspiring leadership is the driving force behind all our initiatives, and your gracious presence today at the inaugural event means a lot to all of us. Thank you, sir. So once again, dear friends, a warm welcome to all of you, and I assure you that we are going to have a very engaging and fruitful academic experience starting today and extending for the next 10 days. Thank you very much. So now I request Professor Satyabrat Patnaik, the coordinator of the JNU Gyan Committee, to make his brief address. Over to you, sir.
So good morning, namaste. On behalf of Vice Chancellor JNU and on behalf of all of us, we really thank Professor Chawal for accepting our invitation to initiate this GYAN program. At the end of the 10-day course, if nothing else, one thing you should remember, this is GYAN, G-I-A-N, not G-Y-A-N. There's a Sanskrit term called GYAN, and it's very difficult to translate Sanskrit into English. There's a word like punya. There's no English translation of punya. Similarly, gyan in Sanskrit, there's no, closest term would be probably knowledge. That you will be imparted by Professor Chawal, but you must remember this is GIAN, Global Initiative for Academic Network. We want to smash the idea that things can be downloaded from YouTube and real knowledge can be imparted. We really want to bring in the best in the field, a guru, and then the Shishya. It's a network building. There is a conversation in real life, in physical world. So that's what we want to do. This is the 47th GYAN program, GYAN in JNU. So it started in 2015, and it's been long tradition, but during COVID, probably we had some disruption. This is in GYAN phase 4. In this year, we have 12 courses in GYAN, completely funded by Ministry of Education, and of course, JNU in terms of infrastructure. So remember, this is a networking program. It is not just a series of lectures or series of conferences. The guru is there, Shishya is there. Just interaction is the foundation. I am a physicist by training, and as I said, I'm a sociologist by aspiration. And things are complex. What we seem to think to be real using our sensory, organizing is not really that true. This computer that you are seeing is supposedly made up of electronics, and that is because of transport of electrons. And most advanced theory of field theory will tell you electrons don't exist. They appear and disappear whenever there is an interaction. This podium, which is so sturdy, if I use a good microscope, you see that the carbon atoms, 99% of carbon atom is vacuum, right? But it is so strong. So what we perceive as real, once you go one step below, for example, I'm able to walk because of a force called frictional force. Frictional force is an electromagnetic force. And electromagnetic force is continuous exchange of photons, particles that are moving with velocity of light. If you go just one step below, the world is very complex. And international politics could be equally complex. And Eurasia is the region where a lot of complexities are there. So just what I want to say, Einstein says somewhere, things can be simple, but not simpler. So every effort has, if you really want to understand something, things are going to be complex, and it is only the best in the field, like Professor Chawal, who would come and you interact, then only you know the depths of the matter. this program has been a blockbuster movie. I mean, probably highest participation, thanks to Professor Archana. Among all the Gyan programs, this is so many people. Someone called me at 9 o'clock this morning. I have registered. Can I join or not? I said, this is also being live webcast. If there are constraints on our part, on organization, please join online. So everyone who has registered will get a certificate. But depending on who is regular and who is not so keen, and so this, some people would be in online mode, some most of the offline mode. Well, Delhi weather, how is it? I mean, I think it's fantastic. My postdoc supervisor used to tell me that there's nothing called bad weather; it is only bad clothing. I mean, take responsibility of whatever problem and try to solve it. And with that spirit, I think it's a lovely course that is being offered. I wish you all the best. Learn the maximum. The Guru is here, and your willingness to learn something more is the only thing that is needed. Thank you very much.
Sir.
Thank you.
Now I request the Dean of the School of International Relations Studies, Professor Mattu, for his address. Yes, sir, please.
A very happy Lori, Makar Sankrant or Onam to all of you. As Professor Upadhyaya pointed out, the planet's largest congregation is assembling in Prayagraj for the Kumbh Mela. Apparently, after 144 years is there a similar constellation of stars. So this makes this Kumbh Mela particularly auspicious. But all the distinguished guests, participants, faculty members for this Gyan course, I'm honored and delighted to be part of the inaugural ceremony, especially since the Gyan course is on Eurasian geopolitics and the new great game in Central Asia. This initiative, as you know, and you just heard, is supported by the Ministry of Higher Education, and really the idea is to expose students and faculty to the best international scholarship on an area, to increase the international footfall, and contribute to a general sense of greater internationalization of higher education, especially in universities. I would like to first of all extend my congratulations to the Professor Archana Upadhyaya, because without her visionary leadership, this course would not have been introduced and wouldn't have attracted the kind of participation that it has done. Her dedication to advancing knowledge in Russia, Central Asia, Eurasia is commendable. We are proud of her, and it's through her efforts that the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies has marked its presence in every sense of the word. I would also like to thank Professor Patnaik as the Gyan coordinator of JNU for his great support in this endeavor. As you heard, over the next 10 days, you will all be engaged in 28 hours of lectures and tutorials by the esteemed Professor Pierre Chabal from Le Havre University in Normandy in France. His expertise, and I've had a flavor of his expertise recently at a conference organized by the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, will provide a rich introduction to the debates surrounding one of the most complex and interesting areas in international politics, Eurasian geopolitics, and I have no doubt that his insights will inspire and challenge our students. By the end of the course, I am sure you'll have a comprehensive understanding of the multiple perspectives on Eurasia, understand Eurasianism as a concept and as a practice, understand the geopolitics of the game being played between great powers in the region, and it should help at least aspiring PhD students to identify new research areas, potential PhD topics, also the kind of research questions that you need to ask yourselves as you delve deep into writing your PhDs. If time had allowed, Professor Shabal, I would have eagerly joined this course, as the subject matter is not only topical but also vital. And I'm really excited that you are offering this course. Unfortunately, I will not be able to make use of it, but I imagine, Professor Patnaik, that this will be recorded and available to faculty subsequently, even though you may not agree to give a certificate at the end of it. I am particularly thrilled to hear that nearly 90 participants, MA, PhD, and several faculty members will contribute to this course. And really, in some ways, given that this is not just in the lecture mode, but also an interactive mode, that there will be a vibrant discourse which will be articulated through the next 10 days. I commend all of you for your commitment to not just the subject, but also to furthering this form of education, especially the Gyan network, because the real proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's only when you, students, participants, actually find courses like this useful, are able to make the most of the international expertise which is really brought to your doorsteps, will this be sustainable in the future. And by the end of the course, you will receive a participation certificate, a testament to your hard work and dedication. So please, all of you, take advantage of this unique opportunity to learn, engage, and grow. And we have 3 courses lined up. One, Professor Samina Hamid is presenting a course on Saudi Arabia. There's another course offered by the Center for International Trade, I think, and Development, and all in the 70th year of the School of International Studies. As Professor Upadhyay said, there could be no better beginning for this year and for our 70th year. So may I congratulate all the participants, Professor Shabal, Professor Upadhyay, and Professor Patnaik for all his support. May you learn over the next 10 days as much as possible, and may you grow up to be even better intellectual leaders of JNU and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mattu. Thank you. May I request, it's my proud privilege to invite our guest of honor, our Gyan resource person, Professor Pierre Shabal, to speak to us. Sir, please.
Dhanyavad, namaste. Let me begin with expressing my concern that my French accent will be clear to you over the next few hours and days. 28 hours is an awful long time, so I hope you survive my teaching. Let me begin with 3 corrections on the previous speakers. Professor Upadhyay spoke about the perspectives that I should be bringing to you. These are perspectives I'm going to gain from you, not bring to you. Professor Patnaik talked about the quality of the teaching, and I wish to underline the quality of the audience. And Professor Mattu carelessly talked about exposing you to my insights and the unique opportunity for you to listen to me, but vice versa. It's the chance for me to be exposed to your questions coming from India on the New Asia, and a unique opportunity for me at my age and in this stage of my career to discover new perspectives. I ambition to make 4 points to you this morning in this inaugural session. The first point is probably very French, very emotional, and I wish to say that among the full array of professional emotions, I'm quite certain that today will be the pinnacle of such emotions for me. Just imagine an ordinary teacher such as I, born, raised, and living in a country 6 times smaller than yours being eternal India, yet given the chance to address in Asia an Asian audience to share views on Asia. This is the unique aspect of it, I think. In addition to this undeserved honor to address you as the children of midnight, that is, I believe, the title of the book, The Children of Midnight, or Midnight's Children, I think is the proper title. Yeah. To address you in English is an added challenge for all. As is well known, the French cannot speak English. To be sure, as I pretended 3 months ago to say here in this very university, Sabase katin kam asis main hahana nahin balki dusaron dvarta samaja janahe. What is most difficult is not to exist, but to be understood by others. So from the bottom of my heart, Dhanyavad. My second point now is to suggest that for the substance matter of the days to come, the task ahead of us is to share some views on the new Asia and to attempt to understand how, in just a few years, the post-Cold War Sino-post-Soviet Asia has become an East Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, South Asia, Asia. That is to say, how containments and counter-containments, even within the communist bloc, nearly 40 years of closed Soviet-Chinese borders, from the 50s to the 90s, have yielded to not just open and stabilized borders, but in addition to moving interests in the same direction, or interests moving in the same direction, to use proper English, which I call the re-Asianization of Asia. And this concept of re-Asianization, or indeed Asianization, I'm sure we will discuss. One fundamental error that many observers from outside Asia made, or possibly are still making, was, or possibly still is, to believe that an Asia that re-exists can only do so in an anti-Western way. It is a mistake because the most effective way for any special entity to exist is, first of all, by itself, for itself, but secondly, to construct a capacity in so doing to be on a par with other world regions. Yet, yes, it seems that 2001 was a turning point. But which 2001? Was it September or was it June? Attacks on the USA or the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, picking up from the Shanghai Five? That is the question. To be sure, there are many reasons to suggest that June 2001 already is a continuation, not just a landing mark, not just a marking date, but a continuation of other dates. 1978, the opening up of China. 1985, and the ensuing glasnost in the Soviet Union. 1991, the de-thawing of Central Asian borders. 1992-1996, border negotiations. 1996, the formation or the formalization of the Shanghai Group. 1998, nuclear tests in India and Pakistan, challenging the 1968 treaty. On the back cloth of the 1979-2005 isolation of Iran, the 1992-1994-2000 North Korean nuclear crisis, and the creation in the new Asia of at least a dozen international organizations or their reactivation. ASEAN 2, according to my terminology, from 1995, with the enlargement to Vietnam and others, the SARC, South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, the CICA, the Conference for Interaction and Cooperation in Asia, the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, the EAEC, East Asian Economic Community, today Union, the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, the Conference for Islamic Cooperation, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Economic Cooperation Organization founded by Iran, and the ASEM for Asia-Europe meeting, to mention only a few and underline the thriving nature of the new Asia's reinvention or recreation or creation. As well, of course, as a number of looser structures, such as the APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and today the New Silk Road / One Belt, One Road / whatever. My third point is to suggest, therefore, that without effort, and possibly without notes, if I were competent, one could go on into the twilight, the night, and the dawn about pair-Asia initiatives that are particularly Asian, to engage more than to commit, this is a hint to the essay topic I'm going to propose to you, to functionalize more than to formalize. These two traits are definitely, in my ignorant Western perception, typically Asian. And all that without being particularly in any way versus the West. Was the European construction from 1951 targeted at anyone? Why would the new Asia from 1991 and 2001 be targeted as such at anyone? And so we shall, in the coming days, 28 long hours, share views, not receive views at your end, but share views on what is happening in your region, your great region, in the eyes of a small brain, mine, and at the risk of sounding prosperous. Let us remember one famous line from the comedy My Fair Lady: the French don't care what they say actually, so long as they pronounce it properly. To finish, my fourth point begins with a but. But I could not begin this series of meetings with you without due anecdotes and thanks. 4 of them. First, my presence here is a child of, if not midnight, a child of a Zoom technology, when a seminar online between Paris and Tashkent made it possible, using the chat function, I was attentive but still chatting, to make contact with an Uzbek JNU PhD graduate. This is how it began, through the Uzbek connection. Second, this led to my contacts with the wonderfully human ambassador of JNU academic elegance, Professor Achana Upadhyay, who for over 4 years now has provided a non-ending series of initiatives. Third, in turn, and with the support of the Sefasil Foundation and Dr. Jan Alex, this opened up seminars with Almaty colleagues, one in Kaznu, Almaty, 2 here in JNU, within only 1 year, September 2023 in Almaty, and February last and October last. My third point is to say that 2 deans of JNU, School of International Studies, Dean Kondrapalli and Dean Matu, trusted me with seminars and published books without even knowing me well. They took a risk. That this risk may have been mitigated by Professor Upadhyay's benevolent vouching, I know not. What I do know is that without such encouragement, the applications to the Gyan knowledge program would never have been piloted, submitted, nurtured, fine-tuned, and become a reality. Dhanyavad to all, to Gyan, to JNU, to the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, and to the young colleagues and students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So over to you, Rajan, for a vote of thanks.
I think it's already been done, but again.
No.
Good morning, happy Lodi, happy Makar Sankranti, depending on the place that you come from. So it's an honor and privilege to extend a vote of thanks to all of you. An event like this requires cooperation at various levels, institutional level, which is JNU, national level, because ministry is involved, and also institutional level, 3 levels of analysis that you learn in IA. So, in that spirit, I would like to thank Professor Chabal, who saved his time and came to India. Very last few months he was here, and then again he came here. So, Professor Chabal, thank you so very much for coming here. In the same spirit, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor of JNU. Without Professor Santisri Pandit, without whose support and guiding spirit, this could not have happened. She has been very kind to us all the time. So thank you, ma'am, for supporting us. In the same spirit, I would like to thank Professor Satyabat Patnaik. Sir, thank you for supporting us, supporting our center, and extending all kind of funding and support to us. We have very dynamic dean here, and he'll certainly go down as one of the best deans of SIS. So, sir, thank you for being so supportive to all of us at various levels, and also for this program. So, thank you, ma'am. Again, without your hard work and commitment and encouragement, and the kind of hard work that you put on going into each and every detail. So without that, it would never have been possible. And she has undertaken wonderful initiatives in the center and elevated the level of the center. So, ma'am, thank you very much for taking our center to a next level. I would also like to thank my colleagues here and other colleagues who are not here, but they have always been supportive to us staff members, Amit, Sonu, and all other staff who have been supporting us. Thank you very, very much. Our wonderful audience, 89, we had 80, now more than 89, and we had to stop it because I said there's no space for us. So please, thank you for joining, thank you for registering, And I'm sure that 10 days this lecture and networking exercise, as Professor Satyavat Patnaik has said, so this is, you're going to learn a lot, and please interact at various levels with Professor Saval. And he's very friendly and humorous person, and you'll enjoy his company. And last but not the least, I would also like to thank Madam Shabal, who is here. So thank you, ma'am. Without your kind of agreement, without your support, Professor Shabal would not have come here. And thank you, she is here. So give a big round of applause, ma'am. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. And tea would be waiting outside, so please join us for tea and snacks. Thank you.
Thank you. So the inauguration comes to an end. Friends, please join us for tea.
खाना पीना के अलावा नहीं बात सब कुछ
ये उसी रेनोवेशन से होटल का स्टे भी दे रहा है इवेंचुअली कुछ नहीं होगा
I mean, just for the love of it, huh?
Just for the love of it.
ये सर और ये आपका वो है ना यस कोई इश्यूज हैं जो आप जान रहे हो
हाँ वो सुचेर का राजन का मुझे बोला ये आपकी चेयर
आप लेके जाओ
आपके एंड हो रही है
हाँ सर 25 तारीख को
21st century technology is being tested, and I'm very lucky to have this colleague next to me helping me out. So this is page 1, that's fine, but you need the other document, okay.
You want any highlight?
No, I don't need to highlight on that document.
सेव करके रिप्लेस करते हैं
Can you take away the yellow line?
Do we need to highlight anything here?
No.
Okay, then CV में highlight.
Yes, as I speak you do, but yes.
I just have to scroll, right? As you
Yes,
speak.
scroll.
And what you need in Google Docs? Sorry, Google Maps.
Okay, can you open this one?
Yeah.
Yes. And zoom up.
Check.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
Now
yes.
the other document. And make it full screen.
1 second.
Students, welcome to this India online course, as I've already
This one, and go to page 11.
To get the certificate of participation, it's very important that you have to attend
Yeah.
each and every course.
This is, so you can highlight book after book, this one, these two together, and I will go up, but very quickly. I just need
Like
to,
this, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
and I will tell you, I will show with my finger this book and these books and this book, so you can go up.
Like
Okay.
this, one by one.
Yes, and this will be just 1 minute. It's very quick. I just need to.
Okay, and in Google this one, can you just tell me?
And that's this one.
In Google Maps?
Yes.
What do you need?
When you go to Central Asia, so you need to zoom out. No, zoom out. All the way to Asia.
All the way to?
Yeah, to
Central
Asia.
Asia?
Yeah.
Or I'll put here, Central Asia, no?
Can you zoom out again, please? More. Yeah. More. Yeah. And to show, we need to be able to show Central Asia,
Okay, I'll just get it.
and that's basically.
Okay,
No, that's too much.
yeah? I can highlight.
Okay.
Sir, this is the pointer, sir. The red button, you can try it.
On screen.
Yes, sir. The red button, sir.
So we'll start with this.
So you can point through this.
Yes. Okay, sorry for the technical adjustments. There might be some more in the minutes to come. That's even though we're in the 21st. Can you hear me well? I'm not used to the hand microphone. I'm better used to the this one. But anyway, let me begin this course with its title: Eurasian Geopolitics and the New Great Game in Central Asia. Each of these words should be explained in itself. What is Eurasia is indeed something we have 2 weeks to cover. What is geopolitics? It's the relation between space and power, and what does this mean in the 21st century in Asia? The New Great Game is, of course, a blink or a hint to history, and Central Asia is to be defined, and my definition, of course, extends easily beyond the 5 countries usually mentioned. The subtitle of the course, I think, could be Geopolitics of the New Central Asia and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a process of globalization of international relations or a process of globalization of Central Asia, stressing the word process as an ongoing dynamic, partly formalized but not fully formalized. And indeed, globalization is a word we all know, a word you were born with, which I wasn't, but you were. And what is globalization? Is it just an extension of scale, or is it an extension of dynamics, or a complexification of dynamics? These are all questions for us. I have kept to a very strict minimum the readings for this course. I have no illusion that students do not read what they are given to read. But I think the article by the Chinese colleague Jingguo, The Success of the Shanghai Five, is a compulsory reading because it is short, it is clear, and it relates to the balance sheet of the second half of the 1990s, which is when the new Asia is born, according to me. The charter of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the June 2002 St. Petersburg Charter, is also something you must, well, if I say you must, you are going to dislike me. If I say you should, you might trust me, I don't know. Read and look at. It's a short document, it's a formal document as a charter, of course. And it contains, I think, if you read between the lines, the philosophy of the Shanghai Cooperation as a very, to some extent, top-down construction, but also to a large extent a loose, open-ended, and flexible construction. I have indicated also the article published 1 century after the famous article by Mackinder in 1904, which is relating to a perspective on Mackinder 100 years later. Is this okay? Something is wrong with the microphone, or there is an echo? Okay, so it's too loud then, maybe. So these are the preliminaries of my presentation, and this is a French way of teaching. I don't know if it goes down well here, but to stress the words used in the title, to stress the words used in a subtitle, meaning that each word could be itself the object of a very long dialectical discussion. Having said that, I'm going to cover 8 points this morning, plus a first chapter, so time is not extensible, but I need to do this to introduce myself and to get acquainted with you. My first point is called Greetings, Who Are You and Who Am I? And what will we do together? And I think it is important that we clarify who you are as students of Asia, India in the 21st century. I understand some of you master students, PhD students, young doctors and young colleagues, which makes me even more shy and intimidated. But you come from a different epoch, a different area, a different tradition of intellectualism, and so we need to be able to understand each other. This is my opening phrase this morning. That's the most difficult for us to do together. You, maybe some of you come from outside India, I don't know, or from other Asian countries, but even if you don't buy a passport, you might have interests in other parts of the continent. You might be a Southeast Asia expert, or West Asia, the new name for the Middle East, or Central Asia indeed, and so on and so forth. Who am I? I'm a French educated in France and partly in Britain and Italy, with an interest first in East Asia and Korea, and I stopped working on the Korean peninsula because it was too frustrating to expect unification, and I then veered my interests to Central Asia, which I have been looking at for some years now already. Do I come from Europe in the sense of being a European academic? Technically, yes, but we have different intellectual traditions in Europe, and I'm definitely from the French or the Southern European tradition, what we call the Latin tradition, if you wish. My approach to Central Asia is based on my academic experience, but also based on my field work, having been lucky to travel to Central Asia many, many times, mainly Kazakhstan, as the years passed. And so, again, going back to the title, I use the word process of globalization or process of construction. And this is what I'm going to try to do in this course, to focus on the dynamics, the evolving or changing nature of the new Asia. One reason, of course, is that as far as I'm concerned, the new Asia is the most remarkable recent example of globalization. By which I mean, to complete my first point, is that we are looking at a region which was in many, many ways re-existing or reinvented 30 years ago, and went and is still going through a process of reconstruction. In other words, countries of the region, the 5 countries, or together with them the neighboring countries, are learning to interact together. So they are engaged in a centripetal form of dynamic, and at the same time, which is a very extraordinary tour de force, engaged in a centrifugal dynamic, interacting with the rest of the continent and interacting with the world. 30 years ago, who would have suggested that countries of Central Asia would be partners of the whole world in terms of their foreign trade and their diplomacy? Not many people, but today it is a reached state where these countries are, of course, fully part of the international community, which they were not 30 years ago. My second point concerns the question, who am I, in the sense of, am I qualified to be teaching you? And in that sense, I have very quickly prepared the list of the collective publications we've been doing with some colleagues, starting from 2002, suggesting that in terms of a very European debate regarding Turkey, Turkey was, or should have been, a natural addition, a member of the European construction, which, as you know, is not the case. Hence the concept of a mistake, which I'm going to use in my next part of the course today. Moving up the list, we did 2 books on the institutionalization or the politicization of Europe-Asia relations. Moving up, we looked in 2015 at the concept of inter-regional competition between Europe and Asia in the 21st century. And then a series of books mixing legal aspects called Law Number 1, so on the screen, looking at the limits of regionalization in 2016, and moving up to this one. Yes, this one there. The way in which the changes in society call for responses of the legal systems, moving up to a book on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which ambitioned at the time to have at least one chapter written by a colleague in the country, in all countries at the time, which were members, observers, or dialogue partners of the organization. Then we moved on to another legal book on the European and Asian origins of systems in Eurasia. Then a book on the challenge of change for the legal systems of Eurasia. Then the issue of cross-border exchanges, which was part of another series on logistics and diplomacy, of which we had a seminar here in October. Then we looked at the question of values and mobilities in global contexts for Asia. Again, a legal book on Eurasian challenges to international economic law, focusing on economic law. The Completion of Eurasia was the last book on the series of Europe-Asia analysis. Is Eurasia completed or not? Of course it's not, but it's going there. And the last book on the legal series here with colleagues mainly from Central Asia, and as time passed, colleagues from Europe, Korea, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and other countries. So I don't know if I'm qualified to be teaching you, but what I do know is that we've been looking at innovative questionings as to what is Eurasia. And to the question, what is Eurasia, we have a number of answers that should be given, but definitely we should be aware that there are many different definitions or approaches to Eurasia. I would suggest on the onset that there is a Russian, a European, a South Asian, and an East Asian visions of Eurasia, which are not the same in concept and in ensuing diplomacy. Point three, what is the new Asia? Indeed, beginning the definition of it. I think it is best to approach it by saying it is not a list of countries, it is not a defined space, it is not a cartographic issue. It is an adaptation to a context. An adaptation meaning the adaptation of diplomacies and institutions to a context, the context being post-Cold War, post-Soviet, post-colonial, and a number of post items But to be defined as post something is not satisfactory. I think we should define also the New Asia as being something of its own, and which is basically an invention, something that has never existed in the past, in the recent history anyway. Be it only with Russian-Chinese alliances, with Central Asian re-existence, with South Asia being the balancing power, India in particular, of the New Asia. All these things are definitely more complex and more novel than post something, and not yet finalized yet. Three aspects should be underlined. It is a New Asia with a renewed history, with an acceleration of scales. I will clarify my concept later. And in the post-Cold War, all of these answering the question, the famous question, what to do? What to do in Russian sto delat, which is the question asked of the Russian Revolution in the early 20th century. What to do with independence, what to do with the post-Cold War, what to construct, what to do with the new context. These are questions which we academics put clearly to students and which diplomats deal with without making them sometimes entirely explicit. So if the New Asia is a construction within globalization, what is globalization? Globalization is a dynamic within the context I'm alluding to. Globalization is an invention of new ways of regulating world dynamics and sometimes world tensions. Globalization is not, to me, just a question of scale. It is not an issue of homogenization of the world, which it is not, which some people suggested it was. Globalization does not mean, to me, becoming all similar, possibly all identical, consuming, producing the same things, and interacting on the basis of universal values. Globalization means that there is an acceleration of scale, meaning that we interact more and more without the fractures or the limits or the closings, so to speak, of the Cold War. Globalization is basically a complex world by contrast to a Cold War world which was more simple. It was more than bilateral, it was more than dichotomic. It was essentially three, the East, the West, and the non-aligned. But it was a much simpler world than the post-Cold War globalized world. And so we should focus on the concept of a process. What indeed is a process? And that is a complex question maybe for a course on sociology and not for my course. But the definition of a process, I think, goes a long way back in the history of social sciences. And I quote on my document only two authors. One is Arthur F. Bentley, maybe you know the name, who wrote a century ago or more a book on the process of government, the study of social pressures, and basically explains politics in the most noble sense as a series of adaptation to underlying forces, underlying groups, underlying forces. And so Bentley presents the world of sociology, or the world of politics, as an essentially moving, flexible, readjusting, Cold War is a constant adaptation to a context. Duncan Green wrote a book called How Change Happens, suggesting that change does happen in social dynamics, whereas there are a number of authors who suggest that change doesn't really happen, fundamentally speaking, and that the issue of change and continuity is one where continuity takes over. And to the skeptics of the extent to which the New Asia is a new construction, I put the fact that, and I repeat myself, any way we try to characterize the New Asia is a way in which we come across characteristics, each of them being almost an invention in terms of the past. The recent past, some countries having come out of isolation, some change to the longer past, in the sense that many countries which today are daily partners, some time back not long ago, did not have relations or did not speak to each other, let alone trust each other. And indeed, the trust factor is one key to understand the New Asia, in the sense that trust that did not exist in the recent past today exists fundamentally and fully. My fourth point is the question: why illustrate this process of globalization with Central Asia? That's the question number 4. I think there are a number of simple reasons why the focus on Central Asia is justified. First of all, the new Asia, or Central Asia, or many countries in Asia, if we approach them not as specific states or borders or territories, but as examples of dynamics, characterize the new Asia very, very well. A number of countries have changed their foreign policies in many, many ways. China, for example, has clearly gone from a situation of isolation to a situation of opening up the borders in 1978 to a dynamic where, still pursuing national interests, as every country does, is engaged in a regional multilateral construction. By contrast to other countries which have pursued a much more unilateral top-down approach to geopolitics. Russia has gone through a number of cycles in its foreign policy in the 90s, in 2000s, in the 2010s, pursuing with China a very interesting dual goal to set their rivalry or mutual competition within a multilateral framework, which is the Shanghai Cooperation and other organizations, and attempting and succeeding in many, many ways to subdue their bilateral competition in a more mundane or in a more or in a softer form of diplomatic cooperation. Secondly, the new Asia is, as I said, a dynamic much more than just a space or a territory. And I will cover this in one of the first chapters. What we call Central Asia is not a monolith. It's not a homogeneous state. It is made up of 5 countries at least, and to me, more relevantly, 7 countries, each of which has pursued over the last 30 years a different foreign policy. So already Central Asia, which many observers from outside consider as a bloc or as a similar situation, is made up of very complex and differing diplomacies and foreign policies. And so in that sense, the new Asia is a topical example of the answer to the question what to do with independence, what to do with the post-Cold War, and there were at least 2 or 3 options. Either to continue in a sort of momentous way the alignment on Russia, basically as a continuation of the former situation, independence being compatible with a very proximate form of diplomacy, or to invent a capacity to act as a go-between the major actors in the region. Kazakhstan, for example, being a good example of how to manage both China and Russia and maintain equal balance with the two. Uzbekistan going through a more cyclical form of foreign policy over the past 30 years, and so on. Basically, how Central Asia has been able to manage the new relations with China and Russia, and suggested very early on something which did not materialize, a Central Asian Union, which failed. That was the suggestion of President Nazarbayev in 1992, 1993, but launching more recently in 2017 a scheme called a Central Asian Forum of the 5 Central Asian states, which to me is a renewed embryo of what could one day become a sub-regional Central Asian Union. If so, completing the construction of the new Asia as a number of regional, pan-regional, and sub-regional dynamics echoed by organizations created here and there. So basically, the illustration from Central Asia enables us to make sense, or at least try to make sense, of a number of dynamics which we could illustrate with geometry. There is an issue of triangles, a number of triangles which characterize the geopolitics of the new Asia. The triangle of Russia, China, and one partner in Central Asia, which today seems to be becoming a triangle with Russia, China, and India. India having become 5 years ago, 6 years ago, a member of the SCO. There is another more complex geometry where countries are now connected on the vast scale of the continent through the Shanghai Cooperation, Minsk to Colombo, and Phnom Penh to Cairo, or there are, if you take together the countries that are members or observers or dialogue partners of the SCO, and if you draw lines between each capital of those countries, you have a complex mapping out of the continent, and almost each of these bilateral links and connections is new. To what extent is Cambodia and Belarus and Sri Lanka and Egypt and Mongolia connected in contemporary dynamics? Not clear, yet they are. With 26 affiliates, that's my terminology, 26 affiliates of the SCO, 10 members, 2 observers, and the rest as dialogue partners. This is creating a fascinating dynamic in the region. And so to speak of the construction of the new Asia, I think is appropriate, and maybe even an understatement, if we accept the fact, and I will conclude point 4 with this, if we accept the fact that what we're looking at is the capacity to innovate, the degree of novelty which is being pursued, and that novelty in Asia, in the new Asia, is cooperation, to invent cooperation. And cooperation, the degree of cooperation, is the token by which we can evaluate and assess the dynamic. A mistake sometimes made is to compare cooperation in Asia with integration, as in the case of Europe, and to judge Asia as lagging behind in terms of dynamics because Asia is not yet as integrated as Europe is. The comparison that makes sense to me is not between degrees of integration, but between integration on the one hand, which corresponds to European history, not to Asian history, and cooperation in Asia, which is something we have tried and failed to do in Europe for many centuries, and which Asia is doing. If we compare cooperation in Asia and integration in Europe, then we are doing something valid and useful to understand the new dynamics. My 5th point is more to the point, mobilizing some well-known concepts such as a center or a heartland, using Halford Mackinder's vocabulary. This point number 5 is basically still on the question of, is Central Asia a valid illustration of the new Asia or of the new Eurasia? And the answer is yes, but we need to reverse the logic of Mackinder to understand what is happening. Basically, Mackinder was saying through his famous aphorism, which you know, he who controls in Europe controls the heartland, he who controls Central Asia controls the world island, and he who controls the world island controls the world. This is typically a centripetal perspective on the fact that the peripheries take over the center, or dominate the center, in order to dominate the world with the help of the center. And that is basically wrong in history. It was attempted 3 times and it failed 3 times. It was attempted by the French invading Russia, the Germans invading Russia a century and a half later, and the Japanese invading Eurasia from the east in the 1930s. Each of them aiming more or less clearly and consciously for Central Asia as the lock or the key to the world power. The world, of course, at that time being to a large extent Eurasia, essentially. This has turned into a centripetal dynamic where the new Asia is engaging the peripheries. The center is engaging the peripheries. No longer the peripheries being attempting, or even less so managing, to take over the center, but the reverse dynamic. So it is interesting that the concept of center and the concept of a periphery are still valid, but in a reversed form dynamic. At least this is the approach I'm suggesting to you. Having said that, more specifically, in geopolitical terms, the new Asia is, I think, in many, many ways, the following. It is, as I've just said, a dynamic of extension of the center, a neo-extension of the center. It is also a dynamic which makes it possible to turn tensions, turning extensions, in particular between China and Russia, into a constructive bilateral and multilateral dynamic. Secondly, it is a capacity of key countries, Russia and China again in particular, but also in many, many ways Kazakhstan playing a key role, and of course today India, turning the region's relations into a cooperative integration. And cooperative integration is my concept, trying to blend in cooperation and integration I've just suggested a few minutes ago. Further, there is a clearly interesting way in which China is engaging via Central Asia into the sphere of influence of China, away from the sphere of influence of Russia, but also China engaging Russia in a novel way, China engaging Southeast Asia in a novel way, and I think we should ponder and reflect long about the fact that Cambodia became in 2015, if I'm not wrong with the date, a dialogue partner of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Interestingly enough, Cambodia, being in geopolitical terms the only non-maritime actor of the region, and a country, interestingly enough, because there is the rule of contiguity. All SCO affiliates are contiguous to each other, but Cambodia is not. The only way to connect Cambodia to China in terms of geopolitical contiguity is adding Vietnam or Laos, and of course Vietnam is a difficult partner to China over history and so on and so forth. So you see, this is the degree of innovation we're looking at. And interestingly enough, China engaging West Asia over Central Asia, and I use the term over in the territory of China, into the Shanghai dynamic. Of course, doing so with the consent of the SCO members, but doing so fast, systematically, and irrespective of this or that geopolitical consideration. In other words, moving fast and moving in all directions as soon as they become open and reachable. One good example, I think, of this, two good examples, is the issue of Turkey, and I will come back to Turkey in one of the chapters. But Turkey becoming, in 2012, a dialogue partner of the SCO is a remarkable achievement. The anecdote is that the two presidents met, and one of them said, "Why not join the SCO one day?" and the other say, "I dare you." And then Turkey became a dialogue partner of the SCO, while being a member of NATO. And you're aware of the extent to which the SCO, as it was created, called for comments, some of them being that the SCO was a NATO of the East or an anti-NATO construction, so on and so forth. So for a NATO member to become a dialogue partner or to become an affiliate of the SCO is an achievement, which raises the question of the specificity of Turkey as the only of the 26 affiliates with a status in NATO, and the issue of remaining in NATO, should Turkey be upgraded to an observer or to a member of the SCO? These issues were completely neglected in the West. And I remember my only very unhappy experience with the French radio interview, where the interview was supposed to be on the new directions of Turkey. And not one word, in July 2012, so 2 weeks after Turkey became a dialogue partner of the SCO, and not one word being said on this new initiative of the Turkish foreign policy. And each time I tried to bring this in the conversation, I was cut off as a topic less relevant than the domestic evolution of the Turkish regime and so on and so forth. So we are, and the second illustration, or the second comment that is, I think, necessary is to revert to classic maritime geopolitics and to realize that the 26 affiliates of the SCO today connect China to all the seas of the continent. the wrongly called Sea of Japan, the Sea of China, the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and all the seas. And we know how much maritimity plays a role in geopolitics of the world. Of course, be it only in Alfred Mahan's approach to maritime geopolitics. My sixth point is, if we need more justification, and I don't think we do, to focus on the process of globalization involving Central Asia and the New Asia, we need to use a different word, which is the word comprehensive. It is a comprehensive process in the terminology of the social sciences. And what do I mean by comprehensive? I mean, indeed, a number of dimensions, meaning, first of all, a classic cartographic dimension. The whole continent is now mapped out through the Shanghai dynamic. I mean a comprehensive process in the sense that the nature of the regimes of the countries concerned is not taken into consideration. The debate on the universal values or the political values or the political criteria for a regional construction, which exists for Europe, which exists since the 1998 European Summit, and which disqualify some countries in the eyes of some, not in mine, but in the eyes of some, for example, Turkey, do not apply to the New Asia. Neither the ASEAN construction nor the Shanghai Cooperation construction take into account the nature of regimes which they wish to affiliate, and we have a number of regimes which go the whole spectrum, the whole range of the relation between power, authority, and social construction. Comprehensive also in the sense of being much more than a diplomatic construction. Of course, there are a number of very important agreements and charters and treaties signed, and the content of which is interesting to us, especially when we come to the gradual and real demilitarization of the borders of the Central Asia and the Shanghai construction. But comprehensive means that beyond the diplomatic high politics, so to speak, there is a real attempt to include sectoral construction and the comprehensive inclusion of different sectors of cooperation within the Shanghai cooperation. Economic matters, of course, financial matters, foreign direct investment, cross-border logistics, education with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, university, cultural and even identity origins, mobilizing all sorts of criteria, sometimes religion, sometimes linguistics, and sometimes all aspects of perhaps musical and culinary aspects of culture. And some countries which in history until then never really had much to do with one another suddenly invent for themselves almost a common identity. One very interesting example is China and Sri Lanka, suggesting 20 years ago that they were of the same cultural origin because 1500 years ago, two monks walked from one to the other or back, I forget which way. And so suddenly the two countries were connected by religious history, which may well be the case. I'm not a historian or an archaeologist or an anthropologist, but which is not the first factor that came to mind to qualify Chinese-Sri Lankan relations. So the word comprehensive, I think, again, is in its proper position there. And in French, we call it a cooperation in all directions, which is less complementary. But there is a degree of catch-all attempts or catch-all justifications to invent the New Asia as an Asia that, if you follow the very fast pace of things, is an Asia that is connecting already, not yet Japan and Korea, but, well, Korea is a member of the CICA organization and has become one in 2006, so almost 20 years ago. The CICA is a conference for interaction and confidence building measures in Asia. But connecting east of China and Mongolia and Russia all the way to Belarus and to Egypt and to the Maldives, I think it is, and Saudi Arabia. So that sort of entity, which is already an entity today, which we call the New Asia, which I propose to call the New Asia, is an entity that exists, some would say totally artificially, and some would say totally logically. And the question whether it is artificial or logical is one that is going to be with us for the next days. My usual, not joke, but my usual comment at this point is to suggest that, or is to remind ourselves that in 1951, someone who then at that time would have said that one day there would be a Europe connecting Finland to Portugal and Greece to Ireland would have been laughed at, including especially Eastern European countries. Today, anyone suggesting that the country would leave the EU is almost mocked at, in the sense that many people regret the Brexit, which incidentally, in terms of history, is a very logical thing that England should leave the continental Europe, having for many, many centuries been an Icelandic Europe on its own right. But anyone questioning the rationale, the necessity, the security aspect of European construction today is almost saying something which is over-obvious. It's almost so obvious that it's almost irrelevant to suggest that Europe should be continuing as it is. Anyone suggesting 30 years ago that there would be a Mongolia, China, Russia, Sri Lanka, Uzbek, and so on, Asia would have been, I don't know what, you are from Asia, but laughed at or mocked at, or would have, as the British say, been the cause of raised eyebrows. But it would certainly have caused a reaction, which today seems the opposite. Anyone today suggesting that there would be a collapse of the Shanghai construction would be probably mocked. So my next point, my point number 7, more quickly I hope, is another of questions regarding history. If history is old, how can history be renewed or new? I'm suggesting to you that we're looking at the new history of New Asia, and already 30 years is long enough for some form of historical dynamic being confirmed. But what is 30 years compared to 300 or 2000 or more if we go back to anthropology? It's a very little time, which suggests that if so much has happened in so little time, there is need to use the concept of the acceleration of time, and I prefer the concept I've mentioned already, acceleration of space, which means that space is being transformed, is being shrunk, is being functionalized, is being opened in a very, very rapid way. So if history can be new, what is new about the New Asia? To play on words. What is new about the New Asia is, I think, the capacity to exist by itself, as I've said before, in a centripetal way, to engage others, as I've said before, in a centrifugal way. And what is new about the New Asia is the totally open nature of dynamics and constructions. This is true of diplomacy, this is true of logistics, this is true of even linguistics. If you care to think about it, looking at the language issue, which I believe is very much relevant in education and in international relations, the speed at which, for example, the Chinese have learned Russian and the Russian speakers have learned Chinese is amazing. I'm not less familiar with the history of the Russian language in India, but I'm sure many, many Indians knew Russian, and many, many more Indians are now learning Russian and Chinese, and vice versa, which is relevant for the reason that to share languages is a very conducive factor to integrative cooperation, which we lack in Europe, English being one of our languages, symbolically speaking today the language of the country that has left, but Russian language being still the common language to the so-called ex-Soviet zone, which facilitates things when it comes to, for example, inventing a Central Asian forum. And at some point, the language issue is going to become relevant in this region. And the hypothesis is that English is not going to be the common language here. It's going to be something else, or a mix of languages. So how is the more specifically called Shanghai Cooperation Organization a sign of all this? How is the SCO a symbol or a characteristic of the new history of the new Asia? I'm not sure. I think in many ways the SCO is clearly, when we come to structuring or the institutionalization of the new Asia, relevant. The SCO is indeed an institutional dimension to the new Asia. But the SEO by itself cannot be enough. There is a need in the New Asia, as in any other region, for a cultural dimension, a cultural aspect of the construction, which is slowly happening. And so, going back to the mistake that I've suggested in the past, many observers outside Asia suggest that what brings the new Asians together is an anti-Western stance, which I think may be the case to some extent, but never enough to produce cohesion, coherence, commonality. It's a term I like very much. Having something in common. To have commonality means something else. It means to be able to identify oneself for oneself. And that is something the Malaysians have invented some time back, and they called it the Asia that can say no. The Asian that can say no, in the words of Mahathir, meant, I think, at the time, the Asia that can, Southeast Asia, which can say no to any neo-colonial attitudes on the part of the Europeans, which led to the awareness that the two regions were on an equal par, which led to the invention of the ASEAN dialogue, Asia-Europe meeting in 1996, as a symbol of the equality between Southeast Asia, former European colonies, and Europe, the new European Union dimension. That was picked up by the Koreans, who suggested that there was also a Korea that could say no, no rago mahasin and hanguk, which means saying no to, I think that's my interpretation, to some extent of neo-dependency on the USA or neo-dependency on the West. And I think the Asia that can say no, without being in any way an aggressive or over-affirmative stance, is a way to define the new Asia. Point number 8, the time perspective, or the time scale perspective. The time scale is something I suggest to my students very often is relevant point we should clarify in terms of methodology. What is the time scale relevant to understand a particular dynamic? What is the time scale appropriate, being neither too short, in which case we would miss out on things, neither too long, nor too long, in which case we would exhaust ourselves looking at aspects which are not relevant. What is the time scale that we should deem necessary and relevant to understand the new Asia, the post-Cold War Asia? Is it just 30 years, as most observers suggest, since the famous 1991? But we can discuss, and we will, I think, about the dating of the post-Cold War. The dating of the post-Cold War between, for me, is not 1991. It's a period going from 1985, the assumption of power of Mikhail Gorbachev, and 1998, the Indian and Pakistani nuclear tests. In that time span, things happened, and the world changed very much. Is it a century being essentially the 20th century of Sovietism and the world wars and the two Cold War blocs? To some extent, yes. We cannot understand the new Asia without referring to the Soviet history, be it only because, to my surprise, people still use the expression post-Soviet to characterize the new Asia or the Central Asia. And I first came across this when I visited Kazakhstan for the first time, and I thought to myself, what is France? Is France post-Nazi Germany? Is France post-Roman occupation? Is France post-medieval times? Yes, but how is that relevant to understand France and Europe over the past half a century? I don't know. Do we need to go back centuries and thousands of years and millennia to understand the new Asia? Well, yes, to some extent. We need to understand the evolution, the cyclical evolution of Chinese power. I think more cyclical than the Chinese like to admit. The Chinese have this concept of 5,000 continuous history of Chinese power. Do we need to go back 14 centuries to the introduction of Islam in this region? Yes, to some extent, and to bring into the consideration that the a family of Islam in Central Asia is different from family of Islam in the Middle East and elsewhere. And Europeans, Europe from where I come, very seldom distinguish within Islam the various families to qualify and even characterize relations between Islam and politics, which I think should be done. Central Asia is originally Sufi Islam, which is very different from Habit or Shiite or Sunni Islams, and so this is a big surprise to me, because when we come to Europe, most people would agree that we cannot understand European history without looking at the history of Protestantism, the Reform, and Catholicisms, and the Europeans, to a large extent, forget the Jewish history of Europe over the past, what happened in Spain in the 5th century, 6th century, and so on. So should we go back centuries and millenniums, or only decades, or only a few years? I'm not sure. What I am sure about is that we should focus on, from the point of view of methodology, on agreeing on which time scale perspective is necessary to understand the New Asia. Post-Soviet, post-colonial dimensions are relevant, obviously, but they are not the alpha and omega of understanding the New Asia. What is more relevant, I think, is to understand the way in which, the complex ways in which, and I repeat myself, the New Asia has gone from centripetal dynamics to centrifugal dynamics, and we have time for that in the coming days. To continue with the characterization of the New Asia, still on point 7, going back up, there are 3 things which can be said now and picked up in later chapters. The first one is the relevance of the concept neighborhood. Neighborhood is an obvious cartographic or geographical concept, but has become a coined phrase of the Shanghai Cooperation. Good neighborhood, good neighborly relations has become the coined phrase of the construction of the New Asia, to the extent to which good neighborhood, or the emphasis on good neighborhood, has become the equivalent in Europe to the 2 coined phrases that we had after the First World War, never again, and after the Second World War, a peace system that works. These words make sense for the Europeans. I think for the New Asians, the word good neighborhood is the concept that should be used. Not only because it is used in the terminology of the Shanghai Cooperation, but because it led to point number 2 and point number 3. Point number 2 is the military dimensions of the New Asia. And very strikingly and very pointedly, one of the very early decisions and agreements and treaties signed by the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a series of agreements on the demilitarization of the borders. Very easy concept to demilitarize, meaning to reduce the number of equipment and troops on the other side, to share information among governments as to what is happening by way of equipment and troop movements 100 kilometers on either side of the border. Very easy concept. But think of what this means to demilitarize the borders going back 30, 40 years. Where were the borders between China and the USSR up until the late 80s? They were heavily militarized borders. We come back to that. To the extent that the Chinese feared that there might be a Soviet intervention in China at some point. And I use the word intervention in the very pointed term it has in terms of European history for Czechoslovakia and Hungary. So to demilitarize, and later we'll look at this on Friday, to engage in joint military exercises is an extraordinary leap forward in terms of relations among countries in the region. So much so that when the accompanying organization to the SCO, which is the Collective Security Treaty Organization, was revived and renewed and enhanced in 2003. It started at the same time as the SCO to hold regular yearly, sometimes twice yearly, military exercises, mobilizing Chinese troops, Russian troops, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and so on, and so many troops. And to think of joint military exercises among countries which had been separated, even within the communist bloc, by 40 years of history is quite remarkable. And I will just mobilize two emotional points now, very quickly. I remember very well the first time on the 14th of July, which is Bastille Day in France, our national day, when the military défilé, parades took place on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. For the first time, German troops joined. That was maybe 15 years ago. And the French press, full of emotions about the Second World War and the meaning of the German troops being operating or being present in Paris. That was 30 years after the start of the European construction, and not only with countries such as France and Germany being the founders of the European communities, but the 1963 Franco-German Treaty being one of the pillars of the European construction. Similarly, the first time Japanese troops were present in Cambodia under a UN operation some 20 or 25 years ago. The emotion in Cambodia at the sight of Japanese soldiers, reminding the Cambodians and South Asians of the past history, was extremely high. So to imagine Chinese troops and Russian troops and other troops crossing the borders and moving in the other countries is, on the one hand, something so extraordinary that it is almost unbelievable, but on the other hand, a very technically simple and a necessary step to take. Now, is it extraordinary or is it ordinary? This is the question that we have. And the third point is to extend to which, and I come back to my point on the anti-Western or a Western dimension of the construction of the new Asia. I'm struck by the fact that still today, less so, but still today, many observers, sometimes qualified observers, sometimes colleagues, very intelligent they, not I, but colleagues trying to demonstrate and prove and look for evidence as to the extent to which New Asia is being constructed in terms of the West, not necessarily against the West, but in terms of relation or in comparison or in terms of dynamics involving the West. I'm not saying that there is no dimension that is relevant by way of interregional competition. In fact, for thousands of years, the world has operated on a dynamic of the cycles of power, and I will mention at some point power and terror and the expression of Noam Chomsky at some point. The world history is the history of the cycles of domination, counter-domination, power, counter-power, and so on. That is clear. And I will even mention at some point in this course what was said within the SCO dynamic in 2005. In 2005, at the Astana summit, the expression, I quote from memory, that the SCO was animated by a will to prevent any non-regional influence in Asia from being a reality. So to suggest that the SCO was based on an agreement to limit, to curtail, and to fence off Western influence in Asia is less friendly than to suggest that there would be an Eastern and Western form of agreement. But what is meant at the time? What is meant at the time is that the military intervention after 2001 in Afghanistan and the ensuing opening of military bases, US military bases in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan should come to an end, that there should be a calendar or a timetable established for the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. These were justified concerns at the time, and eventually all these points were reached. Now, to suggest in 2005 that there should be a limit to the non-Asian presence or non-Asian influence in Asia, I don't think is an aggressive statement. I think it's a logical statement suggesting that security should be assumed by countries of their region. And that is not an aggressive statement because 10 years later, a different suggestion was made regarding the fact that the security of Afghanistan could possibly be jointly organized and monitored by both the SCO and NATO in a transition towards stability in Afghanistan. So we see how easy it is to take one perspective or the other and suggest that dynamics can be labeled this or that, sometimes hastily, and we need to take the time to think and to sit back and think and to qualify things more fundamentally. My conclusion here, before I come to what I call a spontaneous chronology, my conclusion here is to suggest that indeed the starting point should be that each region is free to organize itself as it wants. Each region is free to, and has in history, managed its neighborhood dimension in its own way. The Europeans, the South Americans, the West Africans, the Southeast Asians, and so on, have done it differently. But they have all done something to organize their relations differently. And in the past 30 years, what has been happening is that not only the ex-Soviet countries with China and others have reorganized their relations, but they have done so in a very systematic, very innovative, and very intriguing way. So intriguing, in fact, that today we have already the chicken and egg question as to whether the Shanghai Cooperation came about because there was a scheme already underground and being materialized, which we call today the New Silk Roads, or whether the success of the Shanghai Cooperation was such that within the Shanghai Cooperation as this diplomatic forum came the idea of a more material or substantial or concrete and logistical form of cooperation, which is a cross-border transportation scheme called the New Silk Roads. The question of this, as a chicken and the egg, I think has become relevant over the past 15 years, early 2010s until today. And things moving very fast, the New Silk Roads are being challenged today, and you Indians know this very well, by other forms of transport corridors across the continent. So the chronology I would like to suggest to you as relevant, not the only one, relevant to the New Asia is the following chronology. Starting from the late 70s. The late 70s is when, after the opening of China in 78, the then leader Deng Xiaoping mentioned the fact that China needed peace at her borders for 50 years. Very grand phrase and sentence typical of Chinese diplomacy. What did it mean? No one, of course, understood what it meant at the time or even realized or noticed the phrase. Why would China in 1978 need peace at her borders for 50 years? Because China was opening up to the international trade, opening up her maritime borders, and therefore needed peace at her land borders. No country can afford to have instability both in her or his land borders and maritime borders. It is the syndrome of having two fronts to fight at the same time, and no one can actually do this. So in the late 70s, that is my contention. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but this is my contention. China was aware of the fact of the need, as a consequence of opening up its maritime borders to international trade, to stabilize and secure and diffuse tensions at her borders, meaning borders with the Soviet Union, long border from the western tip of Mongolia to the northern tip of Afghanistan, and that was actually attempted at the time, and there were attempts in the 1980s. That's my second date, so to speak. In the 1980s, there were talks and meetings between the Chinese leader and the Soviet leader to try using Gorbachev's softer stance on the Soviet policies to negotiate borders or to at least table the border issue that has marred relations between China and the USSR, and before that between China and Russia for so long. 1992 is the third date, of course, the opening up of borders, because the relevant date to me is that. 1992 and the opening up of borders, more than 1991 and the collapse of the USSR, one being the precondition of the other. The fourth date, 1996. 1996 is the finalization of preliminary border negotiation processes as a one-on-one negotiation. China with each of the other four border countries, and from 1996 onwards, negotiations becoming much more multilateral in essence. With the creation of the so-called Shanghai Five, or the Shanghai Group, which is both a continuation of the negotiations taking place between 1992 and 1996 and a new beginning of the process that is confirmed in 2001. But 2001 is to some extent less relevant than 96 because 2001 is just the addition of one country, Uzbekistan, to the process. Except that 2001, my next date, becomes very relevant in the sense that Uzbekistan joining the SCO means something fundamentally important. It means that the common border with China is no longer the determinant factor of joining the China cooperation. What becomes the most relevant factor is contiguity among members, contiguity among affiliates of the organization, which to date has remained a dominating criterion, except for the case of Cambodia, which I mentioned earlier on. 2002 is the formalization of the process with the adoption of the St. Petersburg Charter of the SCO, as you know, which is a very interesting document to read, which is why I'm giving it to you, because it contains motivations, it contains commitments, it contains constraints, it contains details of the institutions mobilized in forming the Shanghai Organization, the priorities, the so-called fight against the three evils, terrorism, separatism, and activism, and so on. It contains basically all the programs to come within the SCO, possibly with the exception of the economic programs which were adopted later on in 2003 and 2015. 2004 and 2005 and 2009 are the next dates to take into consideration. The granting of the status of observer or the status of dialogue partner to certain countries. Those statuses are provided for in the Charter, but they are granted to Mongolia in 2004, India, Pakistan, Iran in 2005, and a dialogue partner to Belarus and Sri Lanka in 2009, as you know. And these are very meaningful moments when two things happen. On the one hand, the SCO tries to incorporate as quickly as possible, as many as possible neighbor countries. And on the other hand, many countries have this opening towards the new Asia as the only alternative, especially Iran, to isolation. And when I mention Iran in more of the chapters, I will try to underline the potency of the year 2005 for Iranian foreign policy, coming out of an isolation lasting from 1979 all the way to 2005. This is a long time, and eager to join the SCO, even though this was realized only in 2021. Today we have an Asianized Iran, in my terminology, and we have an Asianized Turkey, as I mentioned earlier on. 2010 and 12 now are relevant to us in the sense that these are the years when the so-called admission criteria were clarified for applicants to the SCO. And very interestingly enough, within 2 or 3 years, the SCO went from an official position which was freezing enlargement, suggesting that no new members would be admitted beyond the 6, beyond the 6, to a situation where the criteria were formulated and specified, and so many countries did apply for membership, and the criteria adopted by the SCO in 2010 in particular, with a sense of foresight, I'm not sure, but made as one of the conditions the fact that a country, being an applicant, could not be under international sanctions. It should have relations with all SCO members and also not be under international sanctions, which at the time was the situation of Iran. So by the time 2015 came along and the adoption of the, what is it called, Comprehensive Agreement on Nuclear Issues for Iran, what is the proper name? Yeah, the Joint Comprehensive Agreement. When this came about, very interestingly enough, in the West, this was heralded as a victory of Western diplomacy. But from my point of view, it was a victory, or at least a removal of the obstacle to Iranian membership of the SCO. And this is part of the very structurally relevant process, I repeat, of Asianization of certain countries. And from that point on, Iran not only came out of isolation in 2005, not only became eligible to membership in 2015, but was eventually admitted as a member in 2021. This is part of the new Asia in many, many ways. The rest is known of you. 2013, 2014, the famous speeches by the Chinese leader in Kazakhstan, then Indonesia, launching the land New Silk Road and maritime New Silk Road, I think are relevant moments for the understanding of the Shanghai cooperation. And 2015, of course, Indian application, Pakistani application, and admission in 2017, upgrading of Belarus from partner to observer, and enlargement to 4 additional affiliates situated in parts of the world which were not so obvious to the enlargement of the SCO. Azerbaijan was sort of obvious. Armenia, perhaps to some extent too, but Nepal and Cambodia were less talked about at the time. Since 2017, and the most significant moment of going from 6 to 8 countries, bringing in South Asia into the New Asia perspective, we have a, so to speak, SCO number 2. I call it SCO number 1 from 2001 to 2015-17, depending on which date you take into consideration, and SCO number 2 from 2015-17 to the present day. My last point within this paragraph 8 is a few comments, and then we should stop for a break if possible before I cover chapter 1. I have no idea what the time is suggesting. The time is very short. We'll see what happens. So my last conclusion on point 8 and for the first half of today's session, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, is to suggest 3 things. First of all, it is almost not necessary to underline the comprehensive nature of the new Asia. I have suggested this to you before. And if you are an adept of cartography, just take a map and use colors and gradually color the countries affiliated to the Shanghai dynamic. Now we have countries extending from Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia to Cairo in Egypt, from Minsk in Belarus to Phnom Penh in Cambodia, from Beijing in China to Damas in Syria, and from Moscow to Colombo. This is really, in terms of cartography, almost a dazzling reality, which should cause us vertigo, if anything else. Secondly, in terms of the physical criteria of the new Asia, it is very interesting and logical that the new Asia presents itself in terms of square kilometers and billions of inhabitants, and in terms of natural resources. And on that basis, of course, no region is equivalent to the new Asia. If you add up the land mass of Russia, China, India, Central Asia, and the other countries mentioned, the population, of course, is in excess of, or nearly half of the world's population. And the natural resources, we'll come back to that. The new Asia also contains not only the most important energy reserves in the world, but also combines in terms of its contiguity, the major producers and the major consumers, without having to transport energy from one to the other, with the possible exception of India. Of course, so in terms of macroeconomic, this is the dimension underlined by the Shanghai Cooperation members or affiliates, and it is a reality that in terms of GNP, industrial capacity, currency reserves, and economic development, this region holds the keys to the future of the world in many, many ways. And the last point is the fact that to some extent we can or cannot use European concepts to understand the new Asia. The European concepts of deepening and enlargement, which are very familiar to Europeans. Deepening meaning the extra degree of integration or integrative cooperation, common institutions, programs, policies, to some extent, and enlargement being, of course, the issue of the number of affiliates. I repeat that the SEO has gone between the dates of 2004 with 6 members to today with 26 affiliates, from 6 to 26, which is amazing in terms of speed, in terms of numbers, compared to any other organization in the world. Europe went from 6 to 9 to 10 to 11 between 51, 57 to 81, and then slowly to 12 and 15 and then 27, then to 28 and now to 27 again, soon probably to 29. But this has happened in the New Asia much faster. This is the end of my this is the end of my sort of first session. And if I may, I'd like to go to now what is on the document, chapter 1. The chapter called Learning from Mistakes. And so I have to apologize to you in the sense that there is, to some extent, that there are differences between the titles of the lectures you have on the GAN programs. So today, day one is called on the GAN program Mapping Eurasia, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives, which I think I have talked about. Even though my first chapter on the board now is called Learning from Mistakes, the New Centrality of the New Asia, and I will cover this now. And the tutorial for today is called On the Methodology of Regions, which I think I have covered to some extent already, but I need to make it absolutely clear to you when we have the discussion. What I have to make clear to you is the extent to which when we use the word region, we think we understand what we mean, but we don't, or we need to clarify what is meant by region. And I have a number of criteria for defining neo-world regions, which I will share with you, of course, as I go along. So this chapter is called on the whiteboard, Learning from Mistakes. My perception is that I have already suggested to you this morning that there were mistakes avoided in the New Asia following 1991, but I need to make it clear. I have alluded to it indirectly, but I need to make it clear, covering 4 points which are on the board. 1 point inspired by epistemology, 1 inspired by history, 1 inspired by geostrategy, and 1 by politology, to make the 4 paragraphs clear and distinct from the point of view of teaching you. So from the point of view of epistemology, I think we should ask ourselves, what is a mistake? What is a mistake? And of course, taking away immediately the unjustified, value-loaded, arrogant suggestion that anyone could call anyone else's actions a mistake. I'm not judging that something is a mistake or not in history. I'm just suggesting that we need to reflect about what a mistake could be. In the long term, I suppose I could suggest that nothing is a mistake. In the long term, regimes survive or collapse and are replaced. In the long term, humanity manages to go on. In the long term, violence or accidents or distractions are overcome. But in the short term, by which I mean probably in history, a time scale of decades, short-term a mistake can be defined as a decision taken without insufficient leeway or a decision taken with insufficient reflection. That is to say, on the one hand, that actors of decisions, leaders, kings or monarchs or presidents, take the decision with insufficient reflection as to the consequences of the decision. But on the other hand, of course, can there be a situation where anyone is informed enough to take an enlightened decision with controlled consequences? And the answer is probably no. But why do I quote Noam Chomsky in this paragraph? To suggest that there is a way in which the history of the world, as I repeat myself, is a history of cyclical domination, which he calls power and violence. It is the history of the cycles of power domination. Power cannot take place without violence, whether imperial, whether colonial, whether military, or whether cultural violence. At some point, there's always a degree of violence involved in power cycles. And the history of the world is, in that sense, to some extent, a series of mistakes, in the sense that anyone dominating others later on at some point is being dominated. But of course, this is a epistemological, even philosophical statement that seems unreal when we come to the details of events in the world history. But what you have understood already, I'm sure, is that I will conclude this chapter 1 by the very simple but very relevant suggestion that in 1990s mistakes were avoided. There was a degree, there was a capacity to avoid the mistake of continuing with Chinese-Soviet or Chinese-Russian tensions. The mistake was avoided to maintain an unbalanced relation between Russia and Central Asia. A mistake was avoided in bypassing or ignoring West Asia, and more recently, a mistake was avoided by including South Asia into the Shanghai process. So my conclusion will be that the new Asia is fascinating to us as a series of avoided mistakes. I'm not suggesting perfections, I'm not suggesting ideal solutions or situations, but avoided mistakes. And I will now come to the paragraph 2, which is history or the historical perspective in reverse chronology, or quoting 2 or 3 or 4 would be examples of mistakes made in history. Starting with the Soviet Union and the attempts to reform the system, which Mikhail Gorbachev launched in the mid-1980s. Is something wrong with the microphone? Battery is dead.
So you can continue. I think you can continue.
Well, I can continue, but without being heard is difficult. Oh, okay. Is this working? Yes, yes. So if you accept once more the idea that I'm not judging or I'm not qualifying a situation using valid judgments, I'm just suggesting that the decision taken in 1985-86 by Mikhail Gorbachev to reform the Soviet system could be labeled such a mistake, in the sense that the attempts to reform led to the eventual collapse of the system, because the attempts to reform revealed the extent to which the system was imperfect in terms of economic production, management of a huge space such as the Soviet Union. Of course, the difficulty for me before you is to suggest that, conversely, am I suggesting to you that the absence of an attempt to reform the system would have led to the continuation of the system? That I don't know. No one can guess history. But I'm suggesting that others have said, and not only me. 2 minutes to go. Really? Before discussion. Right. Second example is the decision by the Chinese to isolate the regime in the 1960s throughout their Cultural Revolution. Was that a mistake in the sense that it led to a degree of weakening the system and isolation of the system. The question is asked. I have no time to go over it. Was it a mistake by Japan to take over Germany's colonies in China after the First World War and to engage in the Japanese expansion of the 20th century, which led to the 1945 defeat and collapse of Japanese regime? Was it a mistake undertaken by the Europeans to move into the Chinese interests in the mid-19th century, in the 1840s, and launching in that sense the logical longing of China to level up with the Europeans and the rest of the world later on? Was it a mistake going back in time for the Europeans to move into Mongolia with the symbolic figure of Marco Polo, or for the Mongols to, on 2 occasions, move west into the European spheres, with the result that empires fought each other for so many centuries? And was it a mistake, similarly, going back in time for any imperial dynamic to take over the rest of the continent where it was located? I don't know. All I'm saying is that we could go back and look at history in the sense that certain decisions, certain major moves made by certain actors at the time, in all directions, I'm not saying one was more than the other, could be today looked at a sort of decision that could have been taken in a different way. So since I have no time to say more, I would just say again that however simplistic the concept may seem to you, I look at the past 30 years in the New Asia as a moment when mistakes were avoided. And just to use an a contrario approach, what would be the situation today if we were still with Chinese and Russian tensions as the key characteristic of their relations, with a subdued, dominated, almost non-existent Central Asia, with a South Asia confined to being South Asia without much interaction with the rest of the continent, with an isolated Iran, with a Turkey having only one option, which is the European direction, with a Middle East essentially characterized by an energy tension with the consumers of OPEC and so on and so forth. I don't know, but what I do know is that there would have been a sort of negative continuation of the Cold War, or there would have been a very different continuation of the North-South divide. And by the way, we haven't mentioned North-South divide yet, because this is perhaps to be kept for later. But at the same time as the New Asia is being invented, exactly at the same time, the New South is being invented as well, in the forms of the BRICS in terms of organizations, but in the sense of the BRICS and the new, called today the Global South, being in itself a picking up of the non-aligned movement of the 1950s and 60s. So the last point I'd like to make, which is called point 4, from the point of view of geopolitics and politology, what indeed is the concept of a center today? And what is the concept of a centrality? To what extent is Central Asia central, or to what extent is the New Asia central to world dynamics? These are the questions that I would like to ask, picking up from a concept of pan-Asia centrism by Jaras Ibrahiev, the late colleague from Almaty Kazan University, which suggested in the 2000s on 2 occasions this concept of pan-Asia centrism. And when I came across it, I was intrigued as to what it could mean. And I think it could mean 2 things, the second of which is the one that I keep. Pan-Asia centrism, or indeed pan-region centrism, could mean that one region, in this case Asia, becomes the center of the world and possibly dominating the whole world in a sort of vertical or powerful way. The other way to understand the expression, I think, is different. It is to suggest that stressing not the word Asia or region in the middle, but stressing the word pan and pan-centrism, suggesting that the whole world is indeed evolving towards the invention of a number of centers, pan-centers. Pan meaning whole or comprehensive. A number of centers, whether it is only three, the famous European and North American, East Asian trilogy, which made sense until some time back, but which today is superseded, or a number of regions in the world, pan centers. The world is evolving towards the coexistence and the interaction among centers, of which I see not three, but probably a dozen in the world. Central Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Western Europe, North America, Latin America, West Africa, and so on and so forth. And meaning essentially one thing, that the world is over a situation where there could be a domination by one over all, or a domination by some at the expense of others. The world is indeed evolving in a way which is becoming a superposition of a number of regions in the world, all interacting with one another, and all equal to each other, at least in terms of the values which mean that domination in the form of imperial or colonial or unilateral domination is over. I'm very sorry that time is too short, but I just wanted to introduce these points, and today's session being on the general ideas regarding the New Asia before we come to certain countries in Chapter 2 and elsewhere. Thank you. Sorry? Sure. Yes.
Bonjour. I can just talk. You just talk. Just put it. Okay.
Louder, just be louder.
Bonjour, Professor.
Bonjour.
ऐसे ही पूछूं? Yeah. Yeah. So, Professor, my question is, how far do you agree to the statement that some commentators say it's Shanghai Contradiction Organization rather than Shanghai Cooperation Organization, given the context that the bilateral tensions exist between India and Pakistan, and also between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, for example. So you mentioned a lot about SCO cooperating rather than doing integration like EU. So how do you address the contradiction that exists within the bilateral sphere of various countries in this?
Thank you very much.
Take 3 questions and then.
Yes, I think it's better to take one. Keeping my answers to very interesting question. For some moment, I thought you were recalling the SCO, the Shanghai Contradiction Organization, which would be quite funny. Formally, of course, as you know, the SCO official statement is that bilateral issues are not relevant or tabled or discussed within the organization. Which does not mean that countries can actually discuss. And I think it's a very positive opening in the sense that it is always better to engage in dialogues and conversations rather than the opposite. And so what happens usually in organizations is that, or in meetings, is that countries, even if they cannot table officially their disagreements, for example, India and Pakistan, or Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, or for that matter, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan over cross-border issues of water can engage informally in discussions over the coffee breaks and in the corridors and during the pauses. This is what happens, and we all know it from academic conferences. We know this, but also from diplomatic conferences. My other answer is that the mention of Europe in that context is very fascinating, and I thank you for it, because there is another way of putting the question. When in the region there are a number of ensuing and countries of the region wait until those bilateral issues are solved before engaging in multilateral construction, or engage in the multilateral construction in the hope that in the wake of the multilateral construction there might be some easing out and even perhaps solutions as to the bilateral tensions. We had the same situation in Europe. Europe was constructed at the time when the British-Irish tension was very high, or at least the Northern Ireland issue was very high. There was a Franco-Spanish tension over the Basque country, and there were a number of bilateral tensions which in fact still exist today. You might not know that the French and the Spaniards still have issues over fishing zones, which sometimes mobilize the military and the navy to prevent fishing vessels from clashing, and so on. So my answer is that, and it's not in my answer, history shows that when there is a superseding or overarching interest in region building, bilateral tensions are somehow part and parcel of the luggage which the countries bring together, and things cannot be worse in terms of bilateral tensions after the multilateral process is launched. Now, I'm not an Indian diplomat or a Pakistani diplomat, but my hypothesis is that since 2015-17, the nature or the quality or the informal discussions between India and Pakistan have changed. And the counterfactual question is: would India and Pakistan be in a more tense situation had the SCO not the SCO membership not happened? Of course, we can't answer that, but that is my quick answer to you.
Any other questions? Yes, please. You can just give me loud enough.
Hello, Professor. You talked about Asianness. My question is, whose Asianness? Is it Chinese Asianness or Russian Asianness? Because I largely see Asianness or the capability or agency of any state in terms of material capabilities. So whose Asianness? And you come to a conclusion that we are moving from centripetal tendencies to centrifugal. How did you come to that conclusion? Is it because China has risen, or is it because Russia has declined as power, that you see these periphery engaging in the larger states? Because we also have Mackinder's theory, so where great powers matter. So I largely see agency of any state as in terms of material capabilities.
So your question is on Asianness.
Asianness, and then how do you come to this centrifugal tendency?
Can I add to this?
So sorry, the word is Asianness, right?
Asianness, yeah. Can I add to what he's saying? Yeah. Because this is a very interesting point, because you are using the term New Asia. I wonder if I use the term New Europe, and you know what side I'm coming from. So why is it that, is there because in Asia, when you say there is no dominant culture, there is no dominant religion, the way, for instance, for Europe, you have a dominant religion. But in the case of Asia, there is no one political system, no dominant religion. In fact, all the religions have originated in Asia, all including Christianity, as you know, and the kind of diversity that we have. So I would consider Asia as a cartographic entity rather than a geopolitical cultural entity. And this attempt of creating Asian identity, this was tried by Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, in 1947, just before the independence. Asia Relations Conference was started. But it didn't succeed, and it didn't succeed because of number of diversities and the issues and challenges. So Asia, the term itself, has been created by Europe for an entity which is very diverse and which is very unlike Europe. So And the contradiction that he was raising in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. So there is just too many to even consider Asia as one. So that's what, thank you.
So if the word that you use is Asianness or Europeanness, we are indeed using a term that is in Weberian terms, obviously an ideal type. I'm not saying that there is something fully realized as a homogeneous Asia or as a homogeneous Europe. What I'm suggesting is that the word Asia and the word Europe, which are the same words as before, have a different meaning. Europeanness, which I know a little better, started in the 50s in the sense that the Europeans realized that after 3 centuries and 160 international wars and 16 decisive treaties, as Michel Fouché calls them, they had no choice but to invent something new. And in terms of European history, what they invented new, which was a legal monster, is supra-sovereignty. The inventors of the Westphalian peace, of the sovereignty of the state, invented the supra-sovereign capacity to submit states to a common rule. And so Europeanness, in that sense, has not to do with religion, or has not to do with cartography, or has less to do with even politics, than with an awareness that the survival of Europe depended on the capacity to invent something new. In the case of Asia, again, Asianness does not mean homogeneity or coherence or full integration. It means the capacity to invent something new which has not existed hitherto in history. And my term in my book is for Asia not hyper-sovereignty, although Asia is concerned, especially the ex-Soviet Asia, with the reinvention of natural sovereignties, of course, to which the Central Asians are very attached to, but the invention of juxta-sovereignty, not supra-sovereignty, obviously, but juxta-sovereignty, juxta, as side to side. A very intriguing process by which each of the states is reinventing, reaffirming, and strictly defending its sovereignty, even to the point of nationalistic attitudes sometimes vis-à-vis the neighbors, as illustrated by the Central Asian states on some occasions, because they were rediscovering their sovereignty, and at the same time reinventing the sovereignty and accepting to merge, let me be careful with the words, not to merge, but to bring together diplomacies to the point of committing the SCO members, but more broadly the actors of the new Asia into common programs or common views or common attitudes, not yet common policies, as the Europeans call them, because the common policy calls for a degree of super-sovereignty, but common programs or common attitudes. So my difference with you, and I thank you for raising the difference, is that I do not approach regionness in terms of culture or religion or even history to some extent, but in terms of the existential surge or activist attitude consisting of inventing something new. I have somewhere in my articles my own definition of a region, which I can only quote from memory, but a region is the superstructural moment when actors hitherto divided in history share the awareness of the need to invent a new form of interaction while often reaffirming their sovereignty, and most actively often among countries or nations which have in history been very often at war or in high tensions, in order to juxtapose their sovereignties and defining new common forms of actions. So if we come to the SCO, not only do we have the three fights against the three evils that are mentioned in the SCO Charter, and since then, over the past 25 years, been the motto of SEO cooperation, but we have sectoral programs, economic programs, and we have interesting annual summits where declarations are a full program of diplomacy. So there is Asianness in that sense of inventing a new way of sharing lastingly. Yes, in my definition, religions invent something new which is also lasting, if not irreversible, at least in the short and medium term. So I teach my students usually that geopolitics is essentially something to do with material interests, first of all, and managing space at the same time. Much more than to do with religion or culture, even if we should introduce some shades.
You didn't answer my second question.
So we're done.
One last question for today. Yes, ask me the question from tomorrow onwards.
Hello, sir. So my question is an extension to the answer that was given by you, the question which was put by him. So, sir, like you mentioned that, like he mentioned about the contradiction within SEO, and you mentioned about India and Pakistan, that there have been sort of, relaxation in the bilateral issues between these two countries. But as far as I know, that after these two countries joined SEO, the situation between both the countries has only worsened. So, how do you explain that, in terms of relevance of SEO integration right now? Thank you.
Well, a word of caution should be, of course, that I cannot imagine being competent enough to talk about Indian diplomacy and Pakistani diplomacy in general, and especially not in one of the two countries. So I do not claim to be able to answer your question to your satisfaction. My attitude towards difficult questions is to use comparisons usually. So, in the case of Europe, we've had a process going on for over half a century, which has not done away with all tensions. In fact, we have tensions among certain European member states, which are continuing, sometimes very high, and sometimes extremely even threatening to the cohesion of the European Union. Because elections bring in different governments. Some governments have tended to be more and more conservative, sometimes nationalists, and there is a way in which you could claim that the European solidity is being challenged by disagreements, some of which you know, which could be summed up between some Eastern European views and some Western European views. I'm not able to qualify the nature of the tensions between India and Pakistan. My counterfactual question to you is: are you suggesting that the tensions would have been less or more, to what extent different, had the Shanghai process not happened? Another answer to your question is to quote Jean Monnet, who actually suggested that Europe would be constructed through a capacity to overcome crises. My addition to Jean Monnet, even though he's much more famous, is to suggest that a regional process usually creates tensions, to some extent logically, because countries are made to interact regularly, formally, officially, and meet at very important occasions, which are, in your case, the SEO annual meetings, which are, in our case, the European councils. So countries meet, leaders meet, and governments meet formally in the sessions, and informally in the corridors, as I said jokingly, and they discuss more and more the troubling issues which they have. So I'm sure that in the case of India and Pakistan, the representatives and diplomats have met more often in the context of the SEO, and discussed more, and discussing more, perhaps gone through a phase of exacerbated mentions of tensions. My intuitive belief is that the regularity of the meetings and the I'm looking for the right word, the routinization of the interactions will somehow lead to an easing out of the tensions. But why would, in the short term, perhaps, this is my hypothesis, have Indian and Pakistani tensions mounted? It is something to do also with a new stake revealed by the new Asian construction. That is the logistical dimension of energy transport. I will come to this in one of my chapters, but energy transportation has revealed the fact that the territory of Pakistan is an unavoidable land link between India and the energy production of the Caspian Sea area. In that point of view, from that point of view, either relations improve and energy can be transported through Pakistan to India, or it doesn't, and if not, then there is a maritimity link first from India to Iran or to that part of the world, and then a connection to the land transport. So perhaps, if I may suggest to you, but we can pick up this tomorrow and some other days, it is perhaps because the Shanghai Cooperation Framework suggests that energy transportation issues be redefined, renegotiated, or altered. That has revealed the dependency of India on the Pakistani territory and exacerbated tensions due to the reluctance of Pakistan, perhaps, I don't know, it's your region, to facilitate the passage of energy through the territory of Pakistan. Having said that, there is a scheme which has existed, unless I'm wrong, before Indian accession to the SCO, the TAPI scheme. When was TAPI launched?
Long time, sometime in the early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
2001.
So TAPI is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and the scheme still exists. So we are into a phase of implementation of an existing scheme, and implementation usually reveals disagreements. I'm looking for the right metaphor, but I think the marriage metaphor would be an unhappy one. But let me conclude at that for the time being. The more actors interact, the more they become aware of the differences. At some point, it is my hypothesis, actors share the understanding that there is a common superior interest, as the phrase goes, and this common superior interest is for Pakistan to facilitate energy transits, gaining royalties along the way, and this will at some point become a suggested agreement. I say the same about North Korea. North Korea could be the linked territory between Japan and South Korea and the rest of the continent, deriving huge royalties from the passage of trains and goods, and even energy coming from the continent to South Korea and Japan. A new railway has been remodernized between South Korea through North Korea to China many, many years ago. So there is all the infrastructure, logistical facilitation for that. Yet North Korea, perhaps similarly as other regions, is preferring to block the territory to deriving a high revenue from allowing. So what you are suggesting to me, I think we should pick up the question in the later classes, seems to be a contradiction, which raises the other question, which we don't have time for today, is whether in India's accession, India's U-turn attitude towards the SCO in 2015 was due to the possibility of solving in a multilateral way the energy transport issues through Pakistan. So thank you for this very impossible question. Sorry? Thank you very much.
Thank you and all the best. See you tomorrow. Once again, I will
ये निकाल लें हम लोग
very important.